Hello and welcome back. So I'm going to do a short summary of just what we've covered so far and brief overview of the classes and objects. So we had a look initially at the time class and how we can use client private instance variables and hide them from or in the client code. So you can hide them, but then we have accessor and accessor being the get methods and set methods being the mutator methods. And then we also spoke about the predicate methods, which were just the booleans that reply for if, let's say, an array is full or empty. So is empty is an example of that. Then we also spoke about the this keyword, and this keyword being that it refers to itself. And we'd already used it previously in the previous examples that we used this dot that's whatever the member variable is equals the basically in the constructor, if we were using the constructor to assign it, so whatever the constructor's int this int time for this time as well. So the example that we used was month, year, and day for that. So we had these three private instance variables within our code. We had them declared as private. So we had a constructor then. So when the object is called, it uses that constructor. And within that, then we had int month, int day, and int year. And then we had to let it equal to the class-wide variable, so within the class. Then we also spoke about default constructors. So we only use the default constructor if no constructor is created. If we create a constructor, then the default constructor is not used. So we had a look at that in multiple ways and multiple different parameters that we could pass through, multiple signatures of the methods that we could use within each of the constructors. So when I call the class, then I can pass through the different amount of parameters. So the compiler differentiates the overloaded constructors with the signature. So if there's no constructors, then the default one is used. We then spoke a bit about composition, and that was a has-a relationship. So if we have, I used the example in the video, a car has a clutch, has a steering wheel, so then that also has different classes with it. So our example was date and employee and then employee test. So an employee has a hiring date and a birth date, but we're using the same date class, so as a reference object. So we instantiated the date object, and then passed through within the employee test. We passed through the strings or for the date as well, and for the hiring date and the birth date. And then we also showed how we could see when it was called and when it wasn't called. Then we moved on to enum types, and I said that enum types are implicitly final, and they're also implicitly static. So that means that before you create an object, you can call static enum types. So we had a look at final keyword, which means you cannot change it. If you change it, you're going to get a compiler error later on. Each enum constant then is enum declaration is optionally followed by arguments which are passed to the enum constructor. So just like a regular class, we named it with a capital letter. We also had a constructor with it, and we knew that it was going to be completely final and static. So in the previous video, we had just spoken about bigDecimal as well, and we had also spoken about static members. So when you have as well, let's say if you wanted to call count on the employee object, then the use of using static is that you're calling once you're not instantiating a new object. So you're just calling this static one time, and it's used across all of the classes at the same time. So we gave an example of a player and only going to attack if there are 4 other players within the scene. Then you can use the same count for every player. And we did the concrete example then of the, I shouldn't use the word concrete because we're going to use that later on, but we used the example of using the employee and instantiating 4 different objects, but all 4 objects then referring to the same count because it was a static. And then within the static member variable, we also had to make sure that the get count was also a static method declaration as well. Then we spoke about as well garbage collection. So the Java virtual machine, yay, already looks after that for us, frees up all the resources for us. So we can reclaim the memory and other resources that are used. In other lower level languages, we have to go back and reclaim that memory. And in other instances, there are also memory leaks in other things that we'll look at later on. But what's related then is static, because static allows you to not create an object, so it saves space. It's only referring to one. In particular, you're not creating new objects every time. Obviously, if I copy a Word document multiple times, it's going to cause huge memory problems. So if you think of objects in a similar way, you're creating a new object. So it's like creating a new file every time. It's referring to something else. But with static, you're referring to the same thing each time. So it saves on that. Then we talked about the static import, and we used the import of the math class from the java.lang package, which I used to say it was java.util, but it's java.lang package, which you can look up online as well. And a single static import then imports one static member, and a static import on demand imports all static members of the class. So it's automatically done. We didn't really cover too much of the final instance variables like I thought I would, but we didn't talk really too much about the principle of least privilege. It basically states that you only give access where you need to. You only grant the amount of privilege and access necessary for the code to run. And the final keyword then is not modifiable, which we already know from the enum types. Yay! And then we spoke about the package access, and package being a group of classes, and then within a group of classes you have automatic access to methods or variables. When it's declared in a class, the method then just has access across it if there's no access modifier specified. Access modifiers being private, public, or protected, which in the next couple of videos we're going to look at protected, which we've only spoken about private and public so far. Then we spoke a bit about the bigDecimal, and we used two imported packages of the Java API already. One was the java.text for the numbered format, and the other one was the java.math, I think it was, for the bigDecimal. And bigDecimal is more accurate than decimal, so you'd use it for certain things like calculating interest. There's a static method called value of, which we've seen before in the previous video. So we're going to come across things like value of or is empty a lot, because the methods that are used, obviously the language is quite consistent across a lot of these things within Java. So if we have something like array list is empty, then we can also, within a reference type, you also have different methods that can be used to note whether it's empty or value of or instance of, but we'll come to that as we're going as well. And that's it for the summary. Next video is going to look at inheritance, so very exciting. Please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up if you like it. I'd like your feedback, and also let me know in the comments below what you think, or if I should cover a different topic. Okay, thanks for watching.